think I should mute. Matt, you are the co-host now, so I think you can try sharing your screen. I'm going to turn off my screen sharing. So
Okay, let me give
try
it a go.
sharing your screen.
Mm-hmm.
Move over 1 or 2 slides. This reminds me of when we were in Ukraine, Matt. But we were
Oh
we
my
were the
goodness.
coordinators at that time. Yeah, it's back. I think 5 years ago, 4 years ago. Okay, maybe
That was
try
a,
moving 1 or 2 slides, perhaps.
hang on. Okay, this?
Okay, good.
Okay. And that's
Yeah,
that's only the slides, not the presenter view, right? That's looking good.
okay. So let me check with our team.
Great.
Bear with me, Matt. They've already informed. How do I check this? Mhm.
Hello, Dr. Prihandoro, Dr. Giling.
Hello.
Hi there.
So
Good to
hang on,
see you.
our dean is already here. So let me ask him to unmute. Matt, sometimes you're going to hear me switching to Indonesian. So yeah, if you don't understand, so don't worry about that.
I don't think I've
Uh,
ever heard you speak Indonesian, Pri. That's very
oh,
nice.
really? Well, maybe it will be a first time for everything. Ya. Pak Alamsa, bisa
Boleh?
dengar suara saya?
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Ya,
Good afternoon, Giling.
Hi
Thank
there.
you
Dr.
for
Good to
Matthew.
meet you.
inviting. Yes.
First name is Matthew. Okay. Pak Alamsa, Professor Alamsa.
Yeah.
So Dr. Matthew Gillings is already here with us. So now I give you the opportunity to formally greet him and officially start our visiting lecture session. Over to you, Professor Alamsa.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Prihandoro. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, Excellencies, the Honorable Guest Speaker, Dr. Matthew Giling from Vienna University of Economic and Business, and then the head of the Master Program in Linguistics, Dr. Agus Subianto, MA, the moderator of this event, Mr. Prihantoro, PhD, and distinguished participant, lecturer, student, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to extend to you all a very warm welcome on behalf of the Faculty of Humanities, Diponegoro University. We are delighted and honored to host the visiting lecture entitled Recent Issues in Forensic Linguistics conducted by the Master Program in Linguistics. As we delve into this fascinating field, we will explore the intersection of language and law, uncovering how linguistic analysis can shed light on legal matters. From room testimonies to authorship identification, forensic linguistics plays a crucial role in deciphering complex cases. Let's open our mind to new perspective, engage thought, provoking discussion, and embrace the opportunity to deepen our understanding of the interrelationship between language and the law. Hopefully, our collaboration today will spark enthusiasm to build cooperation in the field of joint research, joint publication, student exchange, double degree, and summer course program, and etc. Our distinguished speaker, Dr. Matthew Gilling, will guide us through the latest development and challenges in this dynamic area to study. So let's embark on this journey of discovery together as we deepen our understanding of the interest ways language shapes the legal landscape. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Professor Alamsa. But please don't go anywhere. Stay with us for a few seconds for photo sessions. Okay. So I will ask our technician to take our picture. So all participants, please turn on your camera. Give us your best pose, fresh pose. And we will compare with the photo after the session. Okay, Tariq, you ready? Okay. Please count. Tariq, your microphone is not on. Okay, thank you very much. The photo session is the first photo session is over. We are going to have another one after the session, and we will compare the result. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Alamsa, for giving nice opening remarks. Now, please welcome our speaker for our visiting lecture session, Dr. Matthew Gillings from Vienna University of Economics and Business, and he will bring you deeper on the topic, recent issues in forensic linguistics. Over to you, Dr. Matthew Gillings.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Alamsa, and thank you, Pri, to yourself, for the nice introduction and for having me in the first place. That was very nice. I've never had a photo session at the beginning, but I took a picture myself so I can remember this. And I hope everybody's still smiling by the end of this thing as well, right? We'll see, but fingers crossed. Okay, let me just share my screen so you can see what I'm working on. Okay, that seems to be working. Yeah, great. Okay. Okay, so I just want to say, first of all, thank you to Pri for inviting me. Prihantro and I studied at Lancaster University in the UK together. And we just had a little catch up before we started. I think this is the first time we've seen each other in about 3 years. So we spent pretty much three to 4 years sat next to each other in separate offices in Lancaster in the UK. And it's it's great to see him again. So I really appreciated the invitation when I heard from him a few months ago. Okay, so I'm going to be talking.
Few months in the same office in the Bellrig House.
Exactly. That was it, wasn't it? Yeah. Exactly. That was a beautiful old building, right? I think it was kind of old Tudor style that we were in. We had to move out of our usual office into a new one. And it was a beautiful old building. Okay, so I'll be talking today about recent issues in forensic linguistics. And I mean, I was thinking, this is not the first time that I've spoken to an Indonesian audience. A few years ago, I think he's in the room, Professor Susanto invited me to a forensic linguistics conference. That was in November 2022. And I gave the keynote lecture at this workshop talking about forensic linguistics and particularly at this intersection between forensic linguistics and corpus linguistics. So what I was thinking to myself is, because Pri and I met doing corpus linguistics, and this is also my field, this intersection between the two, that's going to be the main focus of what I'm talking about today. So there's a few things, okay, on the agenda. I'm going to give an introduction to corpus-based forensic linguistics. This will take around about 45 minutes or so. So I'll start off by defining forensic linguistics, give an overview of the corpus linguistic methodology, but I expect most people should be familiar with this if you've been taught by Pri. You may have done this either on a course or in other courses, done a little bit of this already. I'll then talk about using specialized corpora, so building your own corpora, and using that to do a form of authorship attribution. And this is something that's very common in forensic linguistics to do this, one specific area of forensic linguistics. So I'll take a look at how that can be done. We'll then look at using reference corpora, so these big data sets that are representative of typically a whole language or a whole language variety, and using that to determine meaning, so to find out what a word means. And then we'll also to get into some other key applications. So one is going to be disinformation I'll talk about. Another one is looking at courtroom discourse. So look at just some other areas between the two. That should take around about 45, 50 minutes, I expect. And I thought that would be a good point just to do a quick 5-10 minute Q&A, just kind of an interim Q&A, just so we can get talking, and just to make sure everybody's, keeping up and in the loop and everything. I've then got a second half to the lecture, and that's what I've called an introduction to deception detection. Now, this was my thesis a few years ago, back when I studied at Lancaster with Pri. This was applying corpus linguistic methods to deception detection. So for the second half of this, I'm going to then get a little bit deeper into that. For me, it's really interesting. And also as you go about developing your own student projects, for your own theses and all of this, for me, it'd be really great if more people were looking at deception and deception detection. So that's why I really wanted to focus on that here. So I'll talk about the history of deception and how it's gone from, kind of pseudoscience to actually some really good scientific methods. We'll look at corpus-assisted deception detection, and then in particular, do a little case study on pronouns. So that's the plan. I'll do another Q&A right at the end, but I thought it'd be quite nice just to keep it quite interactive to do it halfway through as well. Okay, so there's two main sources for much of this work. The first half is based on a handbook chapter that I wrote a few years ago, and this is called How to Use Corpus Linguistics in Forensic Linguistics. This is in the Routledge Handbook of Corpus Linguistics, the second edition to that came out a couple of years ago. And I was invited to contribute this chapter on forensic linguistics. So a lot of what I'm talking about is covered in this, right? So for more detail, you can have a look in that. The second thing is, the second half is building upon, or based upon, this book that I recently finished, Corpus Linguistic Approaches to Deception Detection. This is coming out in a couple of months. Yeah, so I only just got this screenshot of the book cover maybe about a month ago. So I'm quite proud of that at the minute. So the second half of the talk is really based on this. And that's also what my PhD turned into by the end. Okay, so starting off first of all with what is forensic linguistics. So I've got a formal definition here from Coulthard and Johnson. And what we can see here is that forensic linguistics covers the study of the written language of the law. So the word by word written language. So this could be law text, legal texts. And it also covers areas such as, legal interpretation, disambiguating what words mean, this kind of thing. We've got the study of interaction in the legal process. So in criminal cases includes everything from an initial call to the emergency services to the sentencing of someone who's been found guilty. So every stage of that legal process, we've got people like the police at the very beginning, stretching through right till the very end and the sentencing. The third one is the description of the work of the forensic linguist when acting as an expert witness. Forensic linguistics basically started as kind of this discipline, this job that people did whilst working in the courtroom. And typically you get academic linguists like myself that get invited to offer some kind of expert witness in the courtroom. So applying corpus linguistic typically methods, and using that as part of an expert witness statement in the courtroom. So this definition, it covers the work of academic forensic linguists like myself, but then also that work when acting as an expert witness. And that's perhaps the more practical side of the job as well, right? So actually putting all of that academic knowledge into context. There's then this other definition from Willem Holman, perhaps a little bit more liberal, so encompasses all areas in which linguists may use their expert knowledge in relation to law enforcement. So a little bit of a more liberal definition, including more. The general point, of course, is that forensic linguistics is not restricted to any specific case or situation, not even using a single method, but it covers everything to do with language and the law. So bringing this together with corpus linguistics, as I do, corpus linguistics, the study of language data on a large scale, the computer-aided analysis of very extensive collections of transcribed utterances. So getting big data sets that are representative of something, typically naturally occurring language. And what we do is look at statistical patterns in that language and then zoom in detail. So a popular saying, I guess, in corpus linguistics is that the numbers tell us where to look closer. Yeah? You look at these broad, large-scale patterns in language and then zoom in more detail on those areas of interest. So exploring the data in this way can reveal patterns that you didn't even know were there, right? Because often these are such large data sets that you could never possibly read all of this, perhaps even in a lifetime. You know, if you're looking at millions or billions of words, it would take so long to read through all of these texts. So by using statistics, you look at the whole thing, look at patterns in the whole thing, and then zoom in those areas of interest. So typical data sets that you might be using in forensic linguistics, we've got real-world casework. Yeah, so this might be ransom demands, might be suicide notes or threats, courtroom transcripts, and telephone conversations. So typically, these are the types of data sets that when someone is called to act as an expert witness, this is what they might be presented with, okay? The police might get in touch with the linguist and say, hey, we've got a suicide note. We need to know who wrote it. Is it legitimate? Is there any kind of deception going on here? In the academic study of forensic linguistics, it might be text messages, instant messages like WhatsApp, tweets or posts, as they're called now on X, right? Status updates on Facebook, forum discussions, chat room logs. Yeah, typically these are the types of data sets that are quite easy to get hold of. Yeah, particularly forums and tweets and this kind of thing. These corporate tend to be quite small. And that's the issue. Yeah, the real world casework, these tend to be quite small data sets. You know, something like a suicide note, this might be 10 words. That's not very good for corpus linguistics. In corpus linguistics, you're wanting millions, maybe billions of words, at least thousands, right? And another issue is that corpora tend to be carefully constructed in some way. A lot of thought is put into how a corpus should be collected, the texts that go into it, how many texts should go into it, whether it's representative, how it's been sampled. And in many ways in forensic linguistics, you just don't have this kind of control over the data that you're getting. You get what you're given in forensic linguistics, especially for this practical, real-world work. So for example, we couldn't ask for a slightly longer ransom demand to be given, right? Just to help the academic study. We can't just ask for better metadata to be given. We really just, we get what we're given. Okay, I've also said that these types of forensic data sets, they tend to be sensitive. And because they are often linked to real world cases, it's often quite difficult to do these analyses, right? So you can't really go back and ask for more data. It might be sensitive, it might be unethical to do that. So we do have to be very careful with these kind of legal and ethical obligations throughout it. So in terms of corpus linguistics, just to get everybody on the same page with this, and from my perspective, there's four main corpus linguistic tools here. And if you want more detail on this, I put a book together a couple of years ago, going into each of these in more detail. So the first one is word lists. So looking at the most frequent words in a corpus, right? You've got your big new data set, maybe 1 million words in size, and you want to find out what the most frequent words are. Maybe the most frequent nouns, the most frequent adjectives, adverbs, whatever it is. This is often a good way to start your analyses. Yeah? When I get a new data set, when I get a new corpus, I often like to do these quick and dirty analyses just by looking at the word lists and getting an idea for what's in there. The next step might be to do what's called concordance analysis, so viewing words within their context. So let's say, for example, one of the most frequent nouns is apologize. Well, using concordance analysis, we can click on that, we can type in the word apologize, and we can find out why people are using that. Okay, why is the word apologize continuing to be used in this data set? There's various ways of doing concordance analysis, okay? More of this is covered in the book, but some of this is quite systematic, going through every single example in turn, whereas some of it is kind of just eyeballing the results and getting a flavor for the type of discourse that's in there. We can then do a collocation analysis, so we can look at which words co-occur together. So let's say, again, taking our example of apologize, we could do a collocation analysis and find out which words appear alongside the words apologize. So maybe we've got a modal verb like should apologize. Maybe this comes there. Or maybe it's the pronoun I apologize. Yeah. So by doing the collocation analysis, we can really find out who is doing the apologizing, why are they doing the apologizing. And all of this is, again, led by statistics. Yeah, we're finding which words statistically occur most frequently next to that, what we'd call the node word, the query term. The fourth key corpus tool is called keyword analysis. And this is finding out what's distinctive about a particular corpus or a particular subcorpus. So essentially we're saying, okay, we've got two data sets here, and we want to find out what occurs in this one statistically more frequently in comparison with this one. I've got a couple of examples of this as we go along. Again, that works on statistics, and that's good because it reduces the likelihood of any kind of cherry picking going on. It's not the researcher that goes along and says, hey, that's what's distinctive about that data set. The statistics tell us exactly what stands out, what's salient in that particular corpus. I've got a little demonstration here just to use each of those tools in turn. And this is related to some work that I'm doing at the minute on corporate wrongdoing. So essentially, I decided to look at the Boeing 737 MAX scandal from a few years ago. There was a couple of incidents that happened between the 6th of November 2018 and November 2020. And essentially, there was a couple of plane accidents. The Boeing 737 MAX, there was some issues with their software. And essentially, the planes, the pilots didn't have any control and the planes just went into the ground. So what I did, I wanted to look at how Boeing, the producer of the aircraft, I wanted to look at how they were portraying themselves. How did they try and retain some kind of credibility in the industry? Because this was awful. You saw that the share price really dropped. The worth of the company dropped over a series of months. So I wanted to find out how they were dealing with that. So what I did was download quite a small corpus, for Corpus Linguistics standards. It was only 19,000 words, and it was essentially 37 documents. So 37 press releases that Boeing released between these two specific dates. I downloaded them and I put them into a tool called Sketch Engine. And this is one of the most frequently used corpus analysis tools. So like I said, the first thing that I like to do is look at the word list, yeah, to find out which words are occurring most frequently within a data set. So I decided to look at the most frequently used nouns in this. And and then I looked at the most frequently used adjectives. Okay, so here I've got the top 20 nouns on the left and the top 20 adjectives on the right. And this gives us an idea of what's in there. Yeah, with such a small data set, of course, it would be possible to read through each of them. Yeah, there's only 37. It'd probably take us half a day or so. That would be completely possible. But by using this method, we're being pointed towards the most frequent parts of it. Okay, it gives us an idea of what's in there. Some of them might be obvious, given our knowledge of the data. Okay, so Boeing appearing first of all. It's obvious that that would be there because it is a collection of Boeing's press releases. But some of them might be a little bit more surprising. So one thing that I like to do first of all is begin to categorize these. So we can see that the key social actors are being flagged. We've got Boeing for one. We've got the customer as another one. We've got the FAA. This is the Federal Aviation Authority in the US. We've got the word pilot. We've got team, and we've got lion. This relates to it, the Lion Air flight. So these are the main social actors that are being talked about in the data set. It also gives us an idea of how Boeing wish to portray themselves. Like I said, I was interested in how they recovered from this. And for that, we can look at the adjectives. Yeah, so we've got words like safe. They used the word safe 35 times in their 37 press releases. Of course, we'd look in more detail about what they're describing as safe, but I'd hazard a guess that they're trying to tell everyone how safe their aircraft still are. We've got other words like erroneous, so claiming that it's just an error. Yeah, it's obviously it was a lot more serious than this, but to them it was an error. Errors tend to be small things in English. You know, we all make many errors every day. But this was a pretty serious error. Words like future, yeah, talking about what's to come, about being forward-looking, about being safe. All of this talking about how great it is. Okay, the next one is concordance analysis, like I said, so looking at words and what they mean in more detail. The reason I decided to look at Boeing is because, well, it was the most frequent noun in the whole data set, but it's also the company name. Yeah, so if we're really interested in how Boeing wish to talk about themselves meta-linguistically, this is a good thing to do. So doing the analysis, we can read through all of these. You know, the Boeing company is deeply saddened. They continue to cooperate fully. They're deeply saddened again. Safety is a core value for everyone at Boeing. They appreciate the hard work of the investigation team. We're going through each of these and building up a picture of the discourse that they're wishing to create. So in general, we can see that they're deeply saddened. Yeah, we can see that they're taking every measure. They're working closely with the investigators. They say that they appreciate, here we go, Boeing appreciates Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee. What they're doing collectively, when we take a step back and look at this, is that they're positioning themselves as an outsider. They are the ones that are offering support and assistance, but only where necessary. Yeah, these are not the ones that are at the forefront trying to find out what's going on. That's the problem of someone else from their perspective. And what they're doing is positioning themselves as an outsider and cooperating in these investigations. So gradually we're building up an idea of the discourse, right? We've got our top nouns, we've got our top adjectives. We can read through the concordances and we're building up this idea of how Boeing present themselves. I then did a collocation analysis. So this is looking at the terms that co-occur with the noun accident. Accident, I think, was the second or the third most frequent word in the whole data set. So we can look at why is that? What are they talking about? Why do they use accident so much? So here, this is a collocation analysis of words in what we'd call the L1 position, so directly to the left of the word accident. And if we look through, we've got 302. So this is the flight number. We've got air. We've got this, recent, these, 610, another flight number. Tragic, ongoing, ensure, and max. Max being the name of the aircraft. Interestingly, looking at this critically, tragic is the only one that shows any kind of emotion. The rest of them are very matter of fact. Yeah, it's just describing the facts and what's going on, rather than letting any kind of emotion shine through. The reason for that is probably because they had a team of lawyers behind them, and they had to get everything signed off. Yeah, they can't just go out publishing and talking about how tragic the whole thing is and showing emotion, because that might suggest that they are taking responsibility for what happened, and that's not something that the lawyers would want. So that we can find out through collocation analysis, yeah, about how they describe the word accident. What I did then was look at collocates of the word accident, but this was in a much larger corpus of general British English. It was the spoken British National Corpus, and particularly the one from 1994. And this was interesting because it allowed us to see how the word accident was being talked about in general English. Yeah, not a specialized corpus like in the press releases, but in general English. And here we can see that accidents are fatal, they're serious, they're tragic. Freak, maybe they come out of nowhere. They're terrible, they're unfortunate, they're nasty, and they're horrific. Lots more emotion is coming through here. And this we don't see in the press releases. Could then do a keyword analysis. So the fourth technique that we've got under our belt. And these are words that are used statistically more frequently in the Boeing scandal corpus, yeah, so in those press releases, when compared with a corpus of general British English. Again, some of these are obvious, yeah, Boeing, aeroplane, quite obvious. But some of them, again, point towards more specialized discourses. So those key social actors, we've got Muhlenberg, we've got Calhoun, Feinberg, Burroughs, Pastor. These are the key social actors, those people that really have something to do with the investigation. And this analysis, it also highlights what the issue was. We've got this AOA, so this stands for the angle of attack. This was something that was wrong with the sensor on the aircraft. We've got erroneous being used to describe that sensor. So we've got these words that really point towards what the issue was in the first place. So that's a little demonstration of how corpus linguistics can be used to study corporate wrongdoing. And corporate wrongdoing is something that would come under forensic linguistics, right? It's related to some level of law enforcement, something that's gone wrong. It is going through the courts at the minute, and it's naturally of interest to the forensic linguist. So why is it a good idea to combine the two, right? Why don't we just stick with something like qualitative discourse analysis? Yeah, why should we bother combining them in the first place? So corpus linguistics combines this statistical evidence, that quantitative evidence, with qualitative insight. And Janet Cottrell, a few years ago, back in 2010, she said the use of corpora in many types of forensic linguistic analysis is becoming increasingly commonplace. And for me, kind of, 14 years later by this point, it now is commonplace. Yeah, it's not becoming commonplace anymore. We've really made it, and corpora are really used in a lot of investigations. Not only in an academic context like I do, but also as an expert witness. Yeah, the academic acting as an expert witness in the courtroom. There's been a couple of overviews of corpus linguistics and forensic linguistics. One is Andrea Nini's overview in 2020, and the other one is Sam Lana's work in 2015. So if you're really looking for a nice overview of the field, I can also recommend these two. There's also solid theoretical evidence to combine the two, and the one that demonstrates it best for me is lexical priming. theory. So here we say that corpus linguistics and lexical priming, they're intertwined. And the idea here is that every time a word is heard or used within context, it occurs with a set amount of collocates, right? We can find that out through a collocation analysis. And by repeatedly using these words within the same context, with the same words next to them, we become primed to use them in that position. Yeah? An example I like to use is the word blonde. Yeah? Blonde in English, it's not a word that we have a whole lot of control over how to use it. There's two main things that are blonde. The first one is hair color. You talk about blonde men and women with regards to the hair. And the other thing is beer, blonde beer. These are the two main things that we describe as blonde. So according to lexical priming theory, when we use the word blonde, we are primed to then use a very specific word next, rather than any of the other nouns that are out there in the English language. And because of this, we see this incremental effect of discourse. The discourse is being built up ever so gradually around us. There's also been some work done a few years ago by Jennifer Hughes and Andrew Hardy, again, some colleagues from our time at Lancaster, and they were looking at the psychological reality of collocations. So what they did was attach electrical nodes to people's heads, and they found that when people said highly frequent collocates, something different happened in their brains to if it was just two completely random words. So something different was happening in their minds when a collocation was used compared to two random words. And that was kind of interesting, right? It's showing that there is a psychological reality to collocation. It's showing that we are primed to use certain words in certain contexts. So in terms of forensic linguistics and corpus linguistics, okay, it combines quant and qual, yeah, quantitative and qualitative, and there's a theoretical reason for doing it. It's psychologically real. But related to forensic linguistics specifically, and this is talking in a US context, it's been suggested that corpus methods offer the best chance of meeting what's called the Daubert standard. And the Daubert standard is essentially a set of criteria that must be met for a testimony to be admissible. So these criteria must be met for the witness statement to even be accepted in court, for it to pass that first threshold before being allowed in the courtroom. So what Solan and Tiersma here say is federal judges must act as gatekeepers to ensure that expert testimony is allowed only when it's sufficiently grounded in valid and reliable techniques. And what they came up with was the following factors. Okay, so number one, whether the theory has been tested, whether it's been subject to peer review and publication, the known rate of error, and also whether theory is generally accepted by the scientific community. And if we think about corpus linguistics, it's pretty good at meeting these. The theory has been tested, right? Lexical priming theory and looking at this psychological reality. The theory has been tested. We know that it's been subject to peer review. There's a whole lot of journals out there in corpus linguistics now and in corpus-based forensic linguistics. We know the rate of error. Yeah, we know what works and what doesn't. And we know that the theory is generally accepted within the scientific community. And this is why Janet Cottrell back in 2010 said it's almost certainly the best placed of all the tools at the disposal of the forensic linguist to enable linguistic evidence to be admitted in court. Looking at what else there is, we might think about some tools used in forensic phonetics. And these are also pretty good at meeting these criteria. Yeah, a lot of this tends to be quite statistical as well, and that also meets this criteria. Okay, so moving on to the next part now with using specialized corpora for authorship attribution. And this is one part of forensic linguistics that is, it's a big field of study, right? It's one of the main areas of study within forensic linguists. So authorship attribution is the process where linguists attempt to identify the author of an anonymous or a questioned text. Yeah, so this is when we really don't know who wrote a text. Or maybe we have an idea, but it's unsure who wrote a specific text. So these texts used in authorship attribution cases could be considered what we'd call specialized corpora. Yeah, it's a very specific text type. But the issue for us is that they're rarely designed. Yeah, we don't really have control over the text that we get. A text here, it might be a text message or a WhatsApp message. It might be a suicide note. It might be some kind of malicious email. It might be a student essay that's suspected of being plagiarized. Yeah, so all of these texts, we might need to find out who wrote it. Where did it come from? And there's a nice quote here by O'Keefe et al. Any old collection of texts does not make a corpus. Yeah, so pulling all of these texts together doesn't instantly turn it into a corpus. And one reason why this is so problematic is because there's not very much of it. Yeah, like I said earlier, maybe this suicide note that we're dealing with, it might only be 10 words. And somehow, based on those 10 words, we have to try and figure out who wrote the thing. Yeah? Compare, for example, the Unabomber manifesto. This is a terrorist manifesto, and this was just under 35,000 words. But then we might have a ransom demand at just less than 100. We have to deal with this, but we deal with it in the same way. So the question we're asking is, did the person who wrote text A, this suicide note, did they also write text B? And how we might picture this is we've got our disputed text here on the left, and we don't know who wrote it. And then we have texts written by various suspects. Typically, this is the easiest way to do it. We have a disputed text and a pool of people who might have written it. And it's up to the linguists to compare the language of that disputed text with the text produced by those other people and figure out the match, the linguistic similarity between them. There is variation on this question, depending on how many texts are under analysis, whether it's known, disputed, anonymous, but typically this is the procedure. So how is it carried out? Well, historically, it was done by something called stylometry. And this is analyzing style features that can be quantified in some way. So it might be sentence length, it might be vocabulary density, or it might be the frequencies of words or word forms. So what that would be, for example, is in each of those different data sets, suspect A, B, and C, and the disputed text, we'd be counting the number of nouns, the number of adjectives, the number of adverbs, and then carrying out a comparison between each of them. So we might say, hey, this one has got, 5 words per 1,000 words. That one's also got 5. There's a little bit of a match there. We might find that the texts have similar sentence lengths. We might think that there's some similarity there. Coulthard et al. Argues, though, that these purely stylometric techniques are rarely applied just because there's a lack of data. Like I said, if there's only 10 words that we're dealing with, that's very difficult. So the approach that was developed a little bit later by McMenamin was called a forensic stylistic approach. And this is pinpointing very specific style markers. And we all have style markers, things that come out in our speech. We might not even know that we're doing it, but it's particular elements of our speech and particular elements of our language that we use, and it's what makes us us. So what we say is that when style markers are identified and combined, they become representative of that speaker's idiolect, their own way of speaking. And it focuses on choices that speakers make. Maybe there's specific idioms that people tend to use quite a lot. Maybe they always sign off their email in the exact way. Maybe they tend to misspell the same word. And what we can see then when comparing texts is saying, hey, that idiom is used. They signed off their email in the same way. Hey, that word is also misspelled. And we can compare that across different texts. Again, Coulthard et al. Suggest that this is it's slightly problematic. It's better than stylometry, but it's also problematic for being too subjective, right? It relies on the linguist, the expert witness, to really get it right and be able to prove that in such a systematic way. One of the most recent ways of doing this work is by Johnson and Wright. And this was some work they did a few years ago, identifying idiolect using n-grams. So n-grams are sequences of n number of elements, usually words, that occur directly after one another. So again, this can point us towards idioms, set phrases, repeated usage of certain phrases. And in their 2014 paper, what they did was use the Enron email corpus, around about 63 million emails from 176 employees, and they compared n-gram usage across disputed and known emails. This was just a test case, yeah, just to see whether authorship attribution was even possible using these methods. And they found that it was. Yeah, it was possible to identify idiolect variation. And they found that one employee consistently used please initial word strings that other employees didn't. So they said, I don't know, please ensure that you X. One employee consistently used this way of speaking, and they could identify that across texts. Even when it was anonymized, using this method, they could identify that. I have another example of this in action. This is just from my own personal, just for demonstration purposes. Over the past year or so, I've been in close contact with a colleague of mine in Virginia. And what I found is that she always signs her emails in a very specific way. Yeah. And this continued. And it's naturally quite an extreme case, but it demonstrates the principle. Okay. So here is some emails from my Virginian colleague in the US, right? This is how she'd write her email to me, and then she'd sign this along the bottom. Best to you from the mountains of Virginia where rain gently falls. Yeah, very nice. How we sign off an email, we say best and then sign off. Then she sent this. Best to you from the mountains of Virginia where today the moving rocks in the creek sound like billiard balls. Then it continued, best to you from the mountains of Virginia, where the rain continues and the creek is raging. And it continued on and on and on. Again, it's an extreme case, but doing an n-gram analysis, we would find a set pattern of language here. Best to you from the mountains of Virginia. And this allows us very easily to trace that language back to this specific person. Okay, so the next step is using reference corpora to determine word meaning. Some cases require us to figure out what a word means. Yeah, it could be its technical meaning, or it might be understanding how a word is used in a specific community of practice. Yeah? Or it might be finding out its general everyday meaning. In some cases, we might want to find out what a word means in everyday English or in the everyday usage of the word. So reference corpora, an attempt to represent the general nature of a language through a wide sampling corpus design. One in particular is the Spoken BNC 2014. So this is a data set of just over 11.5 million words, over 600 speakers. And these were everyday conversations between British English people. But the good thing for us as forensic linguists is that we can limit those searches to specific groups of people. Yeah, we could say, okay, I want to do a search only on males that are aged 16 to 24. We could do that using this corpus. There's also the corpus of contemporary American English that tends to be used quite a lot, more than 1 billion words in signs, 8 different genres. And the claim is that this is representative of modern American English. So these data sets can be used when we're wanting to find out what a word means, what people will understand a word to mean. So as a case study of this, I'm going to talk about a paper by Cunningham and Egbert, and this was related to a case involving Donald Trump. So here we had a special interest group, a group of volunteers, and they were alleging that Donald Trump was in violation of something called the Emoluments Clause. And the Emoluments Clause it's in the Constitution, the United States Constitution, and it bars a public official from accepting any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatsoever from any king, prince, or foreign state. This was written in the 1700s, so it's quite an old way of phrasing things. But this group of people, they argued that because Donald Trump's buildings and hotels receive rent and room rentals and fees from foreign governments, they argued that this was in contravention of the clause. It's saying because he's accepting money from a foreign government, that's going against the Constitution. But for this to make sense, we have to understand what the word emolument means. Does it extend to all Trump-owned businesses or only his work in an official capacity as president? So we have to find out what the word emolument means in order for this case to go ahead. So in the court case, Trump's legal team, they looked at dictionaries, 18th century dictionaries, and these were written when the Constitution was written. And these suggest that emolument has quite a narrow definition, so a type of profit arising from an office or employ, something leveraged by a position of power. Cunningham and Egbert, on the other hand, corpus forensic linguists, they use corpus methods to explore the original meaning in the US Constitution. And they used a corpus called the Corpus of Founding Era American English. There's 126,000 texts from between 1760 and 1799. And this corpus is made of documents from everybody, ordinary people of the day, but also the founding fathers of the country, legal sources, letters, diaries, etc., etc. Because if you want to find out what the word emolument means, well, you need to look at some data from that same time period, because words change their meaning over time, right? To take an example, there are words in Shakespearean English in the 1600s that are very different in meaning to what we have today. And the exact same was the case here. So Cunningham and Egbert, they found 2,800 examples of the word emolument. That's quite a lot, in this data set. They used collocation analysis to investigate the contexts in which the word emolument came, and they used concordance analysis to investigate how that word acts within context. And there was 3 key findings. Emolument appeared within a list of nouns, and it was often the last noun, indicating it was a catch-all term. So emolument, it meant a lot of things, and it was used at the end of the phrase to catch all of that. They found that pay was a kind of emolument, but there were other kinds of emolument other than pay. And they found that the word official was a frequent colloquy. And if that wasn't the case, it would be inappropriate if that were its prototypical meaning. So what they found, and I quote from the paper, the research findings discussed do provide evidence that founding era Americans could have used emolument to describe revenue from ownership of a hotel. So there's the evidence. They Egbert and Cunningham, they submitted this to the Court of Appeals, and they do suggest that Donald Trump is guilty of contravening this clause. So that's an example of how we can use corpus methods to find out what a word means and how that can be important in the courtroom. On to some more academic work now, just before we finish for a little Q&A. This work combines corpus-assisted discourse analysis with forensic and legal topics. Okay, so one is looking at courtroom and legal discourse. So this is the verbal and written proceedings within a courtroom between different parties. In many ways, it's quite easy to do this because a lot of this data is publicly available. But on the other hand, it's quite tough. Yeah, it's quite expensive and it's quite time consuming to get. So in the UK, for example, someone can request a transcription, yeah, of what happened in the courtroom. But this is based on the court reporters reporting, and it's not a direct transcription. And that could be slightly problematic as a linguist. So Heffer uses corpus linguistic methods to explore courtroom discourse, so opening and closing remarks, examinations, how they sum things up, how they persuade in witness proceedings. Janet Cottrell explored the language of power in the case of O.J. Simpson, and Cavalieri looks at the use of metadiscourse, repetition, and reformulation in cross-examinations. Yeah, so this is a potential thing that one could look at, getting access of some courtroom data and then analyzing that in detail. We could look at deception detection. As I said, in a little while, I'm going to discuss this in more detail, but over the past 10 years or so, linguists have begun using corpus methods to explore deception. So Archer and Lansley and McQuaid use W-matrix. This is a corpus analysis tool to explore how different grammatical and semantic categories are spread across truths and lies. Yeah? Sam Larner looked at whether formulaic sequences could distinguish between the truth and a lie. And then a few years ago, I used collocation and concordance analysis to explore the fine-grained detail and look at how this differs across different social groups. Yeah, I was interested in, whether men and women lie in different ways, or different age groups, whether they lie in different ways. So this is another area that someone could look at, right? You could get some data that you think is truthful or you think is deceptive and begin to compare it. And then another emerging field of study, I guess, is disinformation, using corpus methods to study fake news. And a colleague of mine, William Dance, he was finding that false news, that the term false news, this actually dates back to 1534, but it's recently gained attention, of course, primarily since 2016 onwards, when Donald Trump started his campaign. So Dance compares a corpus of tweets which share disinformation to a corpus of tweets made up simply of news links. And he was interested in looking at the semantic domains between them. And essentially he found that disinformation, there was a lot of hiding and hidden words and a lot of finding and showing words. And he said that disinformation is the revelation of fabricated facts that are previously unknown to anyone but the author. So again, this is using corpus methods to study the language of fake news, to study the language of disinformation. And again, this is something that you might think about doing yourself, right? Maybe you get newspaper articles by an organization that have, they've been found to publish a lot of disinformation or a lot of fake news. You can collect all of that into a corpus and then analyze it and find out, okay, how are they actually doing the fake news? How do they do that? How do they persuade people that they are trying to be legitimate? Okay, so that's it for the first half of what I've got to say. So I've given a nice introduction to forensic linguistics, corpus linguistics, how they work together, and then some various examples, right? So we had a look at authorship attribution, we had a look at determining meaning, and then I gave you some extra areas where they two work together. So that's the first section on forensic linguistics and how it can be studied. And I guess now's a good time to take some questions, if anyone has them. The next half that I have to talk about is specifically on deception and deception detection. So of course I can do another Q&A after that. But now seems like a good point, just if there's anything related to forensic linguistics in general. I'm happy to take them now.
Thank you, Matt. There are two questions on my chat box. I think I'm going to paste them so that you can see. So bear with me, Matt. So this is the first question. So they sent me to my inbox.
Ah, here we go. Great.
Second question. Hang on. So trying to paste this. Okay, there you go. Can you see the chat?
I can. Yeah, I'm just giving this a
Maybe
read
we
through.
begin with these 2 questions, and then I will ask the audience for asking the question live after this, perhaps.
Great. Okay, so the first question is, can dehumanizing languages in the mainstream media related to the current genocide be reported to a criminal court? So, for example, killed versus died, a 6-year-old called as a woman by a CNN reporter. Exactly. This is exactly the kind of thing that would make it, right? That would be of interest in the courtroom. The reason why this is of interest is because they are such nuanced ways of speaking that people wouldn't just think about this normally. Yeah, it's the kind of thing that kind of a prosecutor or a lawyer, they wouldn't think about doing this. But for us as corpus linguists, we do see a difference between these terms, right? Killed versus died. Killed suggesting that it's got the transitivity through it. It's clear who is doing the killing, whereas died, this can be through natural causes, right? So there's a very specific, a very distinct semantic aura that's going along with them. So yeah, for me, this is completely the kind of thing that would and should be reported. How that would take place is perhaps another matter, right? Sometimes you find that specific court cases, they invite contributions from the general public and from expert witnesses. And this is exactly what my colleagues did in the US, Jesse Egbert and Cunningham. They submitted what's called an amicus brief. And this is when people out there, they think that they have some kind of expertise that they wish to share with a specific court case. And they submit that as evidence. Yeah? And this is exactly the kind of thing that would and should be submitted. Yeah. Okay, the second question, I was wondering if I can pose a question where Matthew can explain the difference between the statistics when it comes to collocation and which ones should be reported. Fantastic question. What I would say is, as a PhD student, this was the question that I hated getting at conferences because it's really testing your knowledge of different statistical techniques, right? What I would say is there's a fantastic book written by my colleague Václav Brezina, and he wrote a book called Statistics in Corpus Linguistics, and he has a great chapter on exactly this. Yeah. So what it is, very generally speaking, is that some statistics favor highly frequent words, like grammatical words. Yeah. A, the, you, I. Some statistics really favor these highly frequent words. But other statistics, instead of focusing on frequency, they focus on the amount of difference between 2 data sets. So different statistics favor different things. Yeah. There's too much to go into. There's too many different statistics to really get into here. But I can recommend the book by Václav Brezina, Statistics in Corpus Linguistics. We touch on it a little bit in the book that I mentioned that I wrote a few years ago, Corpus Assisted Discourse Studies. We give some examples there as well. So I'd recommend having a look at it and seeing how you get on.
We have a hand raised, a question for you from Susanto, I think. Matthew, so maybe you can take this question first from Susanto
Great.
before
Hi,
going
Susanto.
to another question in the chat.
Wonderful. Good to see you again.
You can open your mic.
Yes. Hello, Gillings. Thank you, Prihantara, Dr. Prihantara. Yeah, nice to meet you again, Gillings. Last time we invited mention again. Very nice manipulate, yeah, manipulate the wording, manipulate the grammar, the structure to imitate someone else's style. I think it is a great challenge for us in forensic linguistics. Insights regarding about this because we are dealing with more data than to compare with the disputed text. Have you? I believe that you have many references regarding about that, and would like to share with us. Thank you very much again.
Wonderful. Thank you, Susanto. I only caught about half of what you said. The sound quality kept breaking up. But of course, in terms of references to do with authorship attribution, I'm going to make these slides available to Pri afterwards so he can distribute them. But all of the references are included in this. In terms of authorship attribution, there's some there's some really great work out there in forensic linguistics, particularly the work of Jack Grieve. Yeah, he's really looked into this in recent years, comparing different statistics used to do this kind of work. Like you say, though, one difficulty is that people often attempt to imitate another person, and that's when it becomes very difficult, right?
Hand raised from Fajri, I think. But Fajri, you can open your mic and ask question.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Priantoro. Hello, Dr. Gillings. My question is about the use of reference corpus in forensic linguistics, especially in authorship analysis or determining the meaning of the word. In Indonesian context, where general corpus, I think, is not yet available, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Pri, because to the best of my knowledge, the large corpus that I know in Indonesia is the RCC Indonesian, registered by Dr. Prihantoro in CKP Web. And what's your suggestion in this context? Should we wait for the general corpus available, or can we use the available corpus like LCC Indonesian? Because for example, in determining the meaning of the word, we consult with the reference corpus, right, with general corpus. But if you don't have one, like in the Indonesian context, what should we do first? Build the general corpus first, or we can use the any available big corpus? Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Great question. This is really a question of how familiar you are with the texts that are in the in the corpus. So in a general reference corpus, it's especially with something like COCA and the British National Corpus, it's kind of collectively agreed within the community that, you know, these are reference corpora, they're representative of the language as a whole, and then we can say something about language as a whole. That's not to say that you can't do that using other corpora, though. Now, what you could do, for example, is collect a corpus of, could be Wikipedia articles, it could be scraping websites from the web, yeah, in Indonesian. What you would have to do when making your conclusions, though, is saying, instead of being able to say that this is in general Indonesian, this is how language is used in this particular context. So what you could say instead is, you know, maybe like the example I gave, emolument. We want to find out what this means in Indonesian, but we don't have an Indonesian reference corpus. Where you could collect some other texts and just say, well, on Wikipedia, this is how the use of emolument is, yeah, rather than it being in general everyday Indonesian. So it's not so much an issue, but you just have to be very careful about the conclusions that you're drawing from it. Yeah. Cool. Good question.
Okay. Matt, are you
Thank
still
you,
happy
Matt.
to respond the question in the chat? Do you still
Yeah,
have the
sure.
time? Or
Sure, we
Yeah.
can probably do another 5 minutes or so in the Q&A. Yeah, this is fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Dear sir, how do we use forensic linguistic approach in lie detection, misleading attempts in press conferences by politicians? Would it be overlapping with critical discourse analysis, or would it be complementing? Good question. So in the second half of this lecture, I'm going to be discussing deception detection. So more on that in a little while. But essentially what I'd recommend is collecting transcripts from politicians, politicians' language, and then looking for patterns in that language. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about certain linguistic features of deception. So this might be a good starting point. As for where it overlaps, this definitely gets into critical discourse analysis, right? Especially when we're dealing with the language of politicians, the language of power. Yeah, this is very much a CDA focus. And also, I think, corpus-assisted discourse studies, a large branch of that is critical in some way. So yeah, exactly, a brilliant approach, and definitely a good complement. Yeah. Okay, the other question in the chat: how do we compare spoken language that we got from YouTube of a public figure and spoken conversation on the phone with the same person, the public figure, by using corpus tools? Which one? Okay, so getting spoken language from YouTube, that's quite easy. Yeah, so one way that I like to do that is when you're on the YouTube page, you can then click Show Transcript, because everything on YouTube is transcribed automatically. And that's really good for corpus linguists. So we click on Show Transcript, we copy that, and we move that into a text file. And then gradually we can build up this corpus of speeches by a specific politician, for example. As for the spoken conversation on the phone with that same person, we have to get access to that data in some way. Yeah, maybe, I don't know in your specific context, but maybe there is a corpus, a data set, these transcripts, perhaps they are made available to you. In which case, that'd be a cool comparison, right? You've got your language of the phone conversations from this politician. You've got their public speeches that you can get from YouTube, and you can compare them. That sounds like a brilliant study to do, actually. As for which tool you could use to do that, the specific program I'd recommend, there's lots of them out there. I use Sketch Engine, and I've used that for the demo in the talk today. But you can use others, right? There's Lanxbox, there's Ankkonk, all sorts of tools out there. And the specific corpus analysis tool, probably make a start with keyword analysis. Yeah, this would allow you to find out what the key differences are between their telephone conversations and their public speeches. The keywords, yeah. Maybe begin to categorize the keywords in some way. Maybe there's some patterns in those keywords. And then really zoom in on them in more detail, right? Begin to look at the collocates of those keywords, the concordances of those keywords. And that really allows you to drill down into the context. Yeah.
One more question in the chat. This is from Professor Cucu Sutarsa.
It's interesting to investigate the collocation of high-frequency words in the corpus. In fact, a very frequent word in a corpus might be very low in another corpus. Yep, exactly. Do you have such data of that? And what about the case in very low-frequency words? It depends on the type of analysis you're wanting to do. Some statistics will take this into account, right? So they will say essentially that this collocate is highly frequent in this data set, whereas this one is highly infrequent in this data set. So we can begin to play around with and have a look at the different collocation statistics to do that. Yeah, that's often a good place to start, is by looking at the different statistics. Good.
Yeah, no more question, I think. We can move on to the second half, Matt.
Great. Okay, let me share my slides again. Okay, thanks for those questions. And of course, do feel free to keep thinking of questions, make a note of them as we're going through, and then can be asked at the end. Okay, so for the second half of the talk, I'm going to be talking about corpus-assisted deception detection. And this is basically an area I've been working in for the past 7 years or so. Yeah, this was my PhD thesis whilst I was at Lancaster with Pri, and I've carried on until now. Okay, I'm continuing to work in this area. Let me get rid of that. Okay. Okay, so as the title suggests, I'll be discussing deception detection, and in particular from a corpus-assisted perspective. Okay, so I'm going to get into to some of these. And like I said, I'm going to start off first of all with an overview of the history of deception detection, and gradually we'll move closer and closer to the modern day. Okay, so it's kind of like an overview of deception detection over time. So early methods of lie detection. Lie detection is an old and broad field, generally because people have always lied. Yeah, as humans, we've evolved to lie. You know, we wouldn't do it unless it was evolutionary advantageous. Yeah, there is an evolutionary advantage to deceiving in some situations rather than others. So the purpose of this is to analyze a person's physiological functions, so behavior and language, to either establish truth or deception. Now, this began with very, very non-scientific practices. Now, it started off with chewing grains of rice in ancient China, for example. You know, liars have dry mouths. And this idea being that if someone chews rice, then their mouth would get very dry, and this suggests that they're a liar. We then had torture in medieval Europe with the saying that pain reveals the truth. And then in the 1800s, we have the work of Lombroso. Lombroso was an Italian criminologist, kind of considered the father of modern criminology. And some of his early work was looking at skull shape, yeah, the shape of someone's skull, and essentially suggesting that certain skull shapes means that you are more likely to be a criminal. Yeah, so the skull shape, you've got a low forehead, bushy eyebrows, deep set eyes, this kind of thing, and suggesting that, you know, this has some kind of correlation with deception. This is, of course, rubbish. Yeah, by today's standards, there's no truth in this. Yeah, the kind of saying that there are criminal races out there, criminal skull shapes. This really isn't a thing. But towards the end of his career, he started developing a tool to measure blood pressure and heart rate, and this is getting a little bit closer to what we have today. Yeah, measuring people's blood pressure, their pulse, and perhaps this having some kind of link to deception. So like I said here, analyzing a person's physiological functions. So physiological meaning we can't really control it, yeah, just like blood pressure, behavior and language to establish truth. A little bit further on, towards the end of the 1800s, we have the work of Stricker. And this is when science began to rise. And this was the use of a galvanometer to measure the electrical conductivity of skin. Yeah, so he'd put little measures on your skin, and if it became conductive to electricity, that meant that you were sweating a lot. That, you know, sweating rises with stress, and this might indicate that someone is lying. So these were some early polygraphs, yeah, early lie detectors. In the 1900s, this is when the polygraph really came into its own, tracking blood pressure, pulse, skin conductivity, and breathing. Now, the issue with polygraphs is that other emotions, such as fear and anxiety, also lead to these kind of physiological changes, right? So when we're worried or when we're nervous about something, we begin to sweat a lot. And it's not only because we're lying. When we're lying, our blood pressure does rise, and this might lead to sweating. But there's a whole range of reasons why this happens. So what it might be is that, let's say we've got a suspect in front of us, we're doing a lie detection test, we're using a polygraph to find out whether they're lying, and actually they're just really nervous. The symptoms would be exactly the same. Yeah. But what we find is that polygraphs are still used across the world, particularly in the United States. They're still used by police forces, despite a lot of evidence that they are not very effective. Yeah, and that's quite problematic because you risk prosecuting people, sending people to prison based purely on these tests. A few years ago in the UK, there was a TV show called The Jeremy Kyle Show. The equivalent in the United States is Jerry Springer. And basically what it is, you get these people coming home and they find that their partner has cheated on them, or they don't know if the baby belongs to them, right? So they get them on this TV show and they do a lie detector test. And what happened a few years ago was that one of the lie detector tests, it was seemingly false. Yeah, it was a case of the test being wrong. And one of the people who went on the show, just a normal everyday person, he committed suicide because the results of the lie detector test were wrong. So these kind of polygraphs are having real consequences. Yeah, it's not just that you're calling someone a liar and then we all move on with our lives. These tests are having very real impacts on people's lives. And that's why it's very problematic for me that the world continues to use them. Okay, so getting a little bit closer to where we are now in the academic study of deception. Deception detection, lie detection, is based on something called leakage theory. And this is associated with the work of Paul Ekman in the 1960s. And it's based on this assumption that deception is a form of concealed emotion that leaks from our bodies. And essentially, he argues that as humans, we have what's called micro-expressions as a sign of concealed emotion. And these micro-expressions, we can define it as a split-second movement in response to a stimulus. To give you an example, when I started this call and I started having a nice chat with Prihantro, we said something, oh, it's great to see you. We haven't spoken in a few years. A flash of emotion will have come across my face. Yeah, maybe I was surprised to see him. I was happy to see him. But we always respond each and every day. We're responding to what's going on around us. And it's these really split-second changes in our facial expression. And this is how our behavior changes, right? So the argument is that by looking for indicators of that concealed emotion, we might be able to see lies taking place. I've got some examples here on the slide. This is the British actor Tim Roth. It's a TV show in the UK called Lie to Me. And this gets into lie detection and how it works. But here you can see, yeah, when we're sad, we typically see drooping of our upper eyelids. We lose focus in our eyes. And there's a pulling down of our lip corners. There's a slight frowning that goes on. But we see at the bottom left, when we're surprised, it says it lasts for 1 second. Our eyebrows raise, our eyes widen, and our mouth opens. Yeah, this might only happen for a second or less than a second. But these are the micro expressions that appear on our face in response to emotion. And according to leakage theory, this might point towards deception taking place. Okay, so that's a very behavioral thing. Yeah, looking at facial expressions, that's all to do with behavior. But focusing on the language, yeah, we're linguists, so let's focus here on the language. Now, there's many lie detection toolkits out there. There's 3 or 4 that are typically used, but there's a good few out there. One in particular that I want to tell you about is called statement validity assessment. And the reason I wanted to tell you about this is because it might be something that students want to use as part of their own investigations. Yeah, it's quite a nice accessible tool that you can use for yourself. So step number 1 in a statement validity assessment is called a case file analysis. So first of all, you establish the facts and you decide where you want to focus your questioning. So let me give you an example of a bank robbery. Okay, someone has robbed a bank. They've been pulled in front of the police, and we want to find out whether they are lying or not. So step number 1, establish the facts and decide where to focus. So we figure out what time the robbery took place. We figure out who was there, what went wrong, all of this. And as the analyst, I look at this and I want to find out where I should question. Yeah, maybe there's something that doesn't sound quite right, doesn't sound completely plausible. That's where you focus your questioning. Step 2, this is where you carry out a semi-structured interview to obtain a statement. So you come up with some questions based on that case file analysis, but then you talk to the person. Yeah, you do some extra probing to find out what went on. Step number 3, you transcribe that interview. Yeah, all of that recording that you made in the interview, you transcribe it all so that it's in written text. And that undergoes what's called a criteria-based content analysis. Now, I don't have time to go into all of them. You can have a look at the original paper, the reference at the bottom. But essentially, there are 19 criteria that the analyst would go through. So we can see here we've got criteria to do with general characteristics, logical structure, quantity of details. We've got specific content, reproduced conversation, unusual details, motivation relation content, spontaneous corrections and lack of memory, and offense-specific element. And the idea is that when you're reading through this interview transcript, you're constantly looking for evidence of these criteria. So let's say, for example, you're reading through the transcript and you find that the suspect, they said something like, actually, I can't remember what happened then. According to this, you should write a little mark at the side of that saying they admitted a lack of memory. Yeah, you might then look through the transcript and find that they spontaneously correct themselves. They were saying one thing, but then they changed to talk about something else. Again, this is a spontaneous correction. So whilst reading through this, you're giving each line a score. Yeah, and a higher score indicates that there is more evidence of these criteria, and they're more likely to be telling the truth. So if the suspect begins to correct themselves a lot, if they admit their lack of memory, if they can reproduce a conversation that happened, if they come up with all sorts of unusual details, all of this is evidence that they are telling the truth. Step number 4 of this is essentially looking through it and evaluating it. Yeah, is there another interpretation? Is there something that we have missed here? Based on our knowledge of the case, based on the case file analysis, is there just something that we've missed altogether? So this is called a statement validity assessment. It's quite accessible for students and PhD students and academics to really give this a go for themselves, right? Maybe you could set up some kind of experimental scenario. Yeah, you set up a fake scenario, you get people to do this interview, and your job as part of your project could be to read through this and do a statement validity assessment, right? This would be quite a nice project to do. This is probably the most widely used assessment tool for deception detection, probably in the world. You see it used quite a lot in North American courts, in some Western European courts as well, in Germany, for example. It's quite a widely used tool. Okay, so a little bit further on, we began to see this linguistic turn in social psychology. A lot of a lot of disciplines have undergone this linguistic turn, but particularly in social psychology, this was around the millennium, the turn of the millennium. And this is when social psychologists began to focus on linguistic cues to deception. Linguistic cues meaning linguistic features that point towards deception taking place. So here we'll say words or phrases that when assessed over large data sets are found more or less frequently in deceptive data sets. This data is typically collected through experiments. And then we assess the spread of different linguistic items across truths and lies. So here are some of the linguistic cues, the linguistic items that point towards deception taking place. So we got fewer self-references. What we find typically is that when people lie, they don't talk about I and me and my so much. They have a lot fewer self-references. And the argument that this is because liars want to distance themselves from the lie. Yeah, they don't want anything to do with it, so they distance themselves and they don't use self-references. We find that liars use more other references instead. They talk about you did this. And they also use we, treating themselves as part of a collective, perhaps some kind of diffusion of responsibility going on. So don't talk about I and me, they talk about you and we when lying. We find that liars use more negative emotion words, typically because they feel guilty. This is the argument. They feel guilty about what they're saying, so they use more negative emotion words. Research has found that more negation and negative statements are used in deceptive language, again, as a type of distancing. Liars talk more about what they didn't do rather than what they did do. And they use negatives, negation, to do that. Research has found that liars use more hedging. Words like perhaps, kind of, maybe, these types of words. But the argument being that it takes more cognitive effort to lie. Think about when you're lying, you have to come up with a completely new excuse. You have to keep track of that excuse. You have to respond to the other person. You have to remember what your lie is. Yeah, all of this takes a lot of brain power. It takes a lot of cognitive effort to do that. And this comes out in your speech, through hedging. And then we've also got filled pauses. So fewer filled pauses through increased cognitive effort. So the three main assumptions here is that liars want to disassociate themselves from their lie. They want to distance themselves. We find that liars feel guilty about the lies that they're telling, and this produces negative emotions. And we find that lying is cognitively more demanding. It's more difficult to lie than tell the truth. Now, there's a broad distinction to make here between non-verbal visual cues, so things like behavioral indicators, where your eyes are looking, your facial expressions, your body language, this kind of thing. We've got paraverbal cues. So these are things like intonation, the rhythm of your speech. So things related to language, but how it's said rather than what is said. And then verbal cues are related to literally the words, the grammatical indicators that are used. However, and this is again a popular phrase in deception detection, there's no one behavior or set of behaviors that occur when people are lying and never at any other time. And the technical term for this, I quite like it, right? Is that there's no Pinocchio's nose. So, Pinocchio, the Disney character, when he lies, his nose continues to grow. There's nothing like this with humans. But looking at how all of these linguistic features interact when they're used together, if they cluster, that's quite promising. That's quite a nice area to look at. Okay, so the question now is, how can corpus-assisted methods be used to study deception? And based on all of that work has typically been done in forensic psychology. Yeah, it tends to be the psychologists that are really doing this work. And naturally, they draw upon a lot of cognitive theory. All of this to do with distancing and cognitive load. That's cognitive psychology that comes from. Now, for me, I was interested in using linguistic methods to look at that in more detail. Because what the psychologists are very good at is relying on theory. They say that because these specific linguistic features occur, it must be because of distancing. Yeah, it must be because it's more cognitively demanding. And I wanted to double check that. Rather than just assuming that that's the case, I wanted to double check that. And again, we can do that using corpus methods. So what I did a few years ago was carry out a series of interviews with participants. Yeah, so I carried out these mock interview situations. The first one was a mock police interview. So I literally had 120 participants come to me in an office. I sat them across from me and we had a mock police interview. I then also did a mock border control interview. So for the police interview, I asked people to provide an alibi. Yeah, they had to come up with a reason for where they were on a very specific point in time. The border control interview, I asked them questions about an upcoming trip that they were going on, where they were going, who they were going with, why they were going, etc., etc. Now, for each of these 120 participants, I asked them to both lie and tell the truth. Now, that was good because what we could do is get language from 120 different people, and we knew with 100% certainty what their language was like when they were telling the truth and what their language was like when they were lying. And then when we do this comparison, we can look for very specific differences in their language. It was sociolinguistically varied. I tried as best as possible to get an even split of genders, to get people from across the whole of the UK, yeah, to try and account for dialect differences, a range of different ages. I really tried to get it as varied as possible. Yeah. In total, it was around about 20 hours of recordings. It was 125,000 words in total. Yeah, it took me about 6 months to transcribe all of these interviews. It was 125,000 words in total, which is quite small for corpus linguistics standards. Yeah, it still took 6 months to compile, but it's quite small for corpus linguistics standards. So just under 61,000 of those words were truthful, and just under 65,000 of those words were deceptive. Already that's kind of interesting, right? We've got 5,000 more words when people lie. And this also fits previous research that when we're lying, we tend to speak more. Yeah. I uploaded this to CQP-Web, a corpus analysis tool. And essentially this automatically tags all of those words in the transcripts for part of speech, so grammatical tagging and semantic category. So I ran it through what's called the USAS semantic tagger. And this categorized every single word in the dataset for its grammatical category, but also its semantic field, right? So the word dog, for example, gets tagged as an animal word. And the word, I don't know, steak gets tagged as a food word. Yeah. So what I did was carry out a keyword analysis. I got all of my truthful language and all of my deceptive language, and I carried out a keyword analysis of them. So here we can see that when people are telling the truth, they use the word very statistically more frequently. Okay, they're more likely to use very. We find that when telling the truth, people, well, here it says they use more full stops. A full stop in my data set meant that it was a pause. Yeah, so when telling the truth, people pause in their speech a lot more. We also find that when telling the truth, people talk about music and related activities. They talk about furniture and household fittings for some reason, and they talk about food a lot more. In the deceptive corpus, we find that when lying, people, for some reason, talk about Paris. They use we. This is what we expected, yeah, using the word we. We find that they say has, and when lying, people talk about sports, they talk about frequency, and they talk about different geographical areas of the world. So there's a lot going on here. And this was very much the starting point for the analysis, just a kind of quick and dirty analysis, just to get to grips with what was going on. Now, my hypothesis, looking at these results, was that when people are lying, they're more creative in their language use. So they're talking about Paris. Yeah, they're talking about these far distant places from the UK. They talk about sports, yeah, something quite exciting. Whereas when telling the truth, it's a little bit more banal. It's more everyday. Yeah, talking about furniture, talk about food. You know, these are just boring everyday topics. So I hypothesized that there was something going on here. When you actually look at the data, it's not quite as exciting, but based on this, that's what I was looking at. Okay, I then did a concordance analysis to look at individual words in their context. So here I was looking at the different geographical names that are talked about. So Lancaster, that's where the study took place. But then we got people talking about Australia, Las Vegas, Leicester, Manchester, Florida, all sorts of places around the world, which is quite exciting, right? Could do a collocation analysis. So looking at terms which co-occur together. So here I was looking at which words tend to be negated. So because I can't, won't, doesn't, didn't, don't, couldn't, etc. Now, again, this was based on all of that research from psychology where they were saying, well, the psychologists assumed that negation is a form of distancing. Yeah, people talking about what they didn't do rather than what they did do. We can check, yeah, using collocation analysis, we can look at all of the types of negation and really go through and find out what's going on. Can also just do a very simple word list, not very exciting in this instance, but we looked at the most frequently used words, word classes in truthful and deceptive language. Okay, as for a quick study on pronouns, this was focusing on one commonly reported finding. So in psychology, we find that there's a lot of research suggesting that when compared to truth tellers, liars use fewer first-person singular pronouns like I and me, but they use more first-person plural we, and they use more second and third person. So you, he, she, they. And the argument is that liars want to distance themselves or they want to diffuse responsibility for their lie amongst different people. Now, the psychology research, they stop at that, right? They stop at the theory and say that's how it is. But using corpus methods, I thought, well, we can check. We can actually check that. So here's a collocation analysis of the pronoun you. So what we find here is that you collocates with thank, you collocates with no, you collocates with tell, your, and give. And just how to read this this graph, right? We've got the word thank. Thank occurs 5 times in the whole corpus, and we've got the log ratio statistic over here. Now, for me, this was really interesting because what we find is that you is collocating with no. You know. Yeah, this is being used as a discourse marker more than anything else. So that's kind of a key finding for me. It's not being used as a form of distancing. Actually, when you look at the data, it's people saying you know all the time. The word no occurs 289 times in the whole data set, but in 186 of those times, it's appearing right next to the word you. So you know, it's just an everyday normal feature of English. We say you know all the time. It's nothing to do with shifting the blame onto someone else. We then also looked at pronoun I. Again, the psychological theory would suggest that people use I to take ownership of the statement. In reality, I is collocating with think, guess, imagine, suppose, believe, and hope. That's not signaling ownership. It's signaling uncertainty. So my second key finding here is that, okay, they're interesting results, but not for the reason that we think it is. And the psychology theory doesn't actually hold up here. Okay, so that's been an overview of how you can use corpus methods to study deception. But because I knew there was students here, I thought I would just discuss a little bit about potential project ideas. Of course, there's a lot of possibilities here because deception occurs in so many different forms, right? So you might look at complete lies like I did, where there's no element of truth within it. You might look at fake news, yeah, which is a very specific type of deception. I recently wrote a chapter on on hypocrisy. Yeah, hypocrisy is a very specific type of deception. So lots of different types of deception. And for your project, you might choose to focus on one specific type. And there's lots of ways that you can analyze it. Yeah, we talked about statement validity assessment. You could compare frequency counts. You could use corpus methods and look at collocations. Lots of different ways that you can analyze it. Like I said, deception is everywhere and it can be analyzed via different means. One data set that I'd like to tell you about is this one. And this is one of the most widely used for deception detection purposes. It's called the hotel reviews corpus, or this is the main paper, the deceptive opinion spam corpus. And what it consists of is 400, well, essentially it's 800 truthful hotel reviews and 800 fake ones, deceptive ones. You can see here how it was collected in different ways, but this is a really kind of gold standard data set to look at deceptive and truthful language, to compare the two. It's completely free to download. You can just Google it. You can find this paper. I'm using it in a project at the minute. But because it's free to download and it's used quite a lot, I thought this would be quite a good, quite a good option for people wanting to look at deceptive language. So one reason why I'm using this is because I'm looking at adjectival usage in this. So we're interested in how when we're lying, we use adjectives to a different level to when we're telling the truth. Let me give you an example. Compare the man walked down the road to the tall man walked down the long road. Well, the second one here has 2 additional adjectives, and that takes additional cognitive effort to do that. So we hypothesize that lies actually have fewer adjectives because lying is already so cognitively complex. We suggest that liars perhaps use fewer adjectives when they're lying. So we're in the process of running the stats as we speak. I've got a meeting about this project tomorrow. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, but this is one, nice study that you could do using this data set. Okay, so looking ahead in deception detection, like I said, social psychology has given us the theoretical understanding of how lies work, but linguistics, because we have an understanding of how language works, we can really begin to distinguish the two. And that's important. Yeah, that's an important contribution. Context is vital for finding out the mechanics of how people deceive. And counting words is useful, right? We can all count how many adjectives occur, but actually looking at the context, and that's where it becomes important. And using corpus methods, we can combine all of this at once, right? We can look at the frequency counts and combine that with the actual context. As for corpus-based forensic linguistics in general, I mean, I said, at the beginning of this talk, how well they work together. It's by far one of the best methods that would hold up in an actual courtroom, right? When it's tested in a courtroom, it's one of the best methods that would allow us to do that. Both forensic linguistics and corpus linguistics value this natural language. For both sets of people, there's no point looking at language unless it has a real world implication, unless it's actual real language data. Both are used in interdisciplinary contexts. Forensic linguistics is open to a range of scholars, and it's perhaps likely that more subfields will develop out of that. And as a field, corpus-based forensic linguistics is increasingly being referred to as a field in its own right. There's not too many people that look at this intersection between the two, but it's slowly becoming its own subdiscipline. And in the UK in particular, we're seeing an increase in these specialist research institutes. So Lancaster recently received some funding to set up an institute here. Aston University in Birmingham got some funding. So forensic linguistics using corpus methods is increasingly being commonplace in the field. Okay, that's it from me in terms of the talk. I hope to have given you a nice overview of, well, everything in forensic linguistics and corpus linguistics, everything in deception detection, and hopefully give you some ideas for your own projects as well. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Matt. There is a question in my inbox directed to you. I'm going to paste this into our chat box so that you can see. But to make it more interesting, Matt, can you guess whether this question came from a man or a woman? Looking at
If only it was that easy right? If only it was so easy.
Compare with the reference corpus, perhaps.
Exactly. That'd make life a lot easier.
Okay.
Okay,
can you see the question?
I'm just finding it. Okay, interesting how Mr. Gilling said that usually psychologists provide analysis and recommendations of treatment on mental health based on theories. Please correct me if my understanding is incorrect. Would the psychologist's recommendations be ineffective if patients are lying during therapy sessions? Completely. So something like that would rely on the the psychologist being able to determine that, right? Now, some people are quite good at doing that. There's been research done looking at how well regular people can tell whether something is a lie or not. And actually, it's slightly more than chance. It's around about 64%. Yeah, in 64% of cases, a human can distinguish between a truth and a lie. That's quite good. Yeah, it's better than chance. It's not 100%. I don't think it ever will be, but it's still fairly decent. And as you say, yeah, providing analysis and recommendations on the treatment of mental health. This is what what psychology research would do, right? It would kind of say, okay, this is the language, this is the theory, here's how we match it up. But actually being able to look at that in context, disambiguate whether there's any kind of deception going on. Of course, that would lead to better situation for all involved. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. We have two people raising hands, but before that, I'd like to answer a short question from Pangesti in the chat box. Can you see that? The question before the question that you just have answered. Do you think that face expression is culturally bounded?
Here, yes, sorry. Dr. do you think facial expression is culturally bounded? I do. And I think that's one problem with doing deception detection on non-verbal features and on facial expressions. I mean, we can see the world over how body language changes across the world, right? When you go abroad, you have to do certain things. Just yesterday, I returned from a trip to Ghana in West Africa. And here you find that handshaking is a big thing, right? In Austria, not so much. Especially during COVID, we didn't shake hands so much. But in Ghana, shaking hands is something that people do. And the longer you shake the hand, the more respect you have for the other person. So I found myself, basically holding hands with people after a while because you're shaking hands so much. This is a form of behavior that is culturally bound, yeah. And when we travel to these places, we really have to learn how something works. So completely, I think facial expressions is exactly the same. There's certain facial expressions that we might make in one culture, but it can be interpreted differently in another. And that's problematic because if we evaluate those facial expressions using the same set of criteria, you risk saying that someone is a liar when in reality they're just from another culture, right? And that's where it gets very problematic to do this. So we have to treat the whole thing holistically to do that. Yeah, good question.
Thank you, Matt. Aulia Arun, you can open your mic. Aulia.
Hi, yes. Hello. Good afternoon from Borneo, from East Borneo. I have actually two questions. First, what is the best way to address doubt when we interpret a data? I ask this question particularly because I just submitted a paper on deception and I examined the conversation or dialogue between a suspect, Jessica Wongso. Maybe you have heard the cyanide coffee murder case. So she is sentenced with premeditated murder. The case has been decided by the court. And based on that, we can know that the testimonies she delivered before the court was pretty much deceptive, right? But what if we encounter inconsistency between the theory and the reality, especially due to situational context? For instance, in the data that I have collected, I collected the data from a news interview. So before she is arrested by the police, she carried out this sort of roadshow from one talk show to another talk show. And then in the interview, she is quite talkative. She gives more detail to information to the news reporter, for instance. But in the court, it seems like suddenly she becomes a whole new different person. So this is a inconsistency between the theory and reality, especially in terms of, let's say, word counts. So as a researcher and analyst, it gives us a doubt. So how to address that? How can we feel more confident in interpreting our own data? And then my second question is, when we analyze a case that has been decided by the court, whether the suspect is sentenced or not, it will give us like a hint. If we say that this person or this suspect was lying and the case has been decided by the court, it is because it is already supported by other evidence. But what if the case is still an open case and we do not have any other evidence? What should we do about that? So this is a question. So what should we do as a researcher and as a linguist? As a researcher, maybe we can like not cherry pick, but we can select the data from case that has been decided by the court. But as a forensic linguist, sometimes we still don't know whether this person is lying or not.
Good questions. I hope I can remember the two questions. You might have to remind me afterwards. The first one is about what should we do if we have doubt, right? Between what we know or what we think should happen based on theory and what actually happens in real life. Interesting case you talk about that I'm familiar with a lot of research in corpus-based deception detection, so very similar to what I did, looking at essentially people who were they went on live television and they were saying that their daughter had gone missing, Yeah, so they went on television crying, making up all of these stories that their daughter had gone missing. In fact, what had happened is that they had arranged for this, yeah, and they wanted to turn into celebrities. Yeah, it's very sick to do that, but that's what happened. And my colleagues who wrote on this, Don Archer and Cliff Lansley, they kind of think of it as two sides to the same person, right? Kind of two different personalities. And I think that's where you're going with when you say, okay, on the news interviews, it's like they're a different person to what happens in the courtroom. Yeah, they turn into a different person. And it's kind of two sides to the same personality. Now, something like that it's strange, but it's not so strange, because what we do in everyday language is we always change our language to suit the situation. Yeah. So it might just be that in this situation in the courtroom, new context, new people, they're changing their linguistic style. What I would say as our position as the researcher, we're kind of in this awkward position where we think we know what's going on based on the theory, but the data is suggesting something else. That's exactly what I found in my work when I was saying, the psychology theory says that it's distancing, says that it's cognitive load, when in reality, it's actually just symptomatic of everyday language using all the time. For me, you'd just be very upfront about this, because that's kind of where the interesting finding comes in. What I would say, it's not very useful in the courtroom, sadly, because the courtroom still, they need some kind of theoretical evidence. Yeah, remember I was talking about this Daubert criteria, the Daubert standard. It has to be theoretically sound. But in reality, what's happening is that it's not fitting that theory, and that can be slightly problematic. So as the researcher, you have to be very upfront and very transparent about your methods and point out this difference. But still being careful to retain some level of persuasiveness in there. The second question, remind me what the second question was.
So what to do if we are facing a case where the case is still open? So we still don't know basically whether the suspect is lying or not, even when we have the linguistic data.
Yeah, got it. Fantastic. You're completely right that linguistic evidence is typically not enough on its own. Yeah, sadly. Let's say you've got fingerprint evidence or some kind of biometric evidence to go along with it. That is always going to be favored more than linguistic evidence. The reason for that being is, as a forensic linguist, we can only ever act as an expert witness. Yeah, so we essentially put our credibility on the line and say, look, based on our years of research and wide reading, our research skills, that this is the conclusion that we're coming to. It's essentially that, right? That you're always going to be one of many expert witnesses typically, and it's always sadly going to be second to kind of fingerprints and this kind of thing. So I think that's just the role of the forensic linguist. Yeah, that's where we're at. It might be that in the future, these kind of methods, new methods are developed that get us closer to telling the truth from lies. I've got some colleagues looking at using AI to distinguish between truths and lies. I have my concerns with that. I have many concerns about AI and large language models. But people are looking at this. When the new trend appears, when the data and the software becomes available, it's the next stage, right? We came from chewing grains of rice and polygraphs all the way through to looking at language now. And we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Okay, but maybe one more question to conclude. So are you suggesting that as a researcher, when we have a project in forensic linguistics, are you suggesting that just to be safe, just choose cases where the case is already decided by the court so we can have more level of confidence?
I think as a test case, that has to be the case. So let's say you are writing a student project or a thesis like I did, or an academic paper. By choosing cases where we're pretty sure which is true and which is a lie, that allows us to find out the difference in that very specific case. Yeah. With that said, I do have concerns when, you say that the courtroom says that this is exactly a truth and this is exactly a lie. Courtrooms are also kind of social constructs where you still don't have 100% certainty. The court decision may be wrong, of course. But I think for research projects that are being published in academic journals, it would definitely be safest to choose these cases where a court has decided this is the truth, this is the lie. Yeah. For expert witness, when, let's say you're invited to the court to provide expert witness on a case, this is when you're applying that knowledge to other cases, right? So that, maybe you've been brought on board to find out whether someone is lying or telling the truth. That's when you can draw on all of that knowledge that you've had, all of that research that you've done. But again, as the expert witness, you have to be very open about that and say, look, this is based on all of this knowledge, but in this particular case, that might not hold up. Yeah, it might be completely different. So it's all about just being transparent. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And I think last question from Dr. Susanto. You raise your hand. Please open your mic now. Dr.
Thank
Susanto.
you very much, Gillings. Dr. complicated, yeah, more challenging also regarding about the using of copy-based strategy in identify whether someone is telling a lie or telling the truth. I would like to know, Gillings, whether the copy-based research findings have been used in European context in the court. Something like, for example, someone who is expert in coppers and then been invited in by the court and then telling whether the suspect is telling the truth or not. If it is so, then how far is it to convince the judge, let's say, or the juries, yeah, in the court, to make sure whether the significance level in the court, because we know that there is a legal consequence that we must be very aware, very careful about that. Totally different in research. Yeah, there is no legally
That's true.
consequence. So I think it is very much important to share. Thank you very much, Gillings. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Susanto. A great question. To my knowledge, deception detection has been talked about in the European courts. The example I have is Isabel Piconel, so the head of the International Forensic Linguistics Association. She's kind of one of really the leading figures in corpus-based deception detection. Well, particularly, linguistic approaches to deception detection. And to my knowledge, I don't know the specific case, but to my knowledge, she has done this, and she continues to provide consultancy in this area. You're completely right, though, that the threshold for significance that we have in academia is completely different to what's required in the courtroom. In academia, at the end of the day, we publish our findings, we put our credibility on the line, and that's it. In the courtroom, these are very real consequences that we have, yeah, and it would be very difficult to go into a courtroom and say, "Hey, this is a lie." Yeah, I can't think of anyone who would do that. I would never put my credibility on the line and do that. Yeah, so we can only get so far. We start with the academic discipline based on what we know, and at the end of the day, we're expert witnesses. Yeah, you're a witness, you're an expert, and you have to come to some kind of social conclusion with that. Yeah, good question.
Thank you very much, Matt. And before we close this webinar, I have some announcements. So allow me to share my screen. This one. There you go. So, right. So in July, from 22 to 27, we are going to host Tips Coding 2024. Diponegoro Summer Course in Corpus Linguistics. Matt, I was inspired by Lancaster Summer Course in which we became assistants, lab assistants. So yeah, this is the second year. Last year, we had a successful Tips Coding with Robbie Love. Peter Crosswhite, and some other presenters. And in 2024 Deep Schooling, I will bring to you Joyce Lim, Nair Kuri, and Gede Primahami Wijaya Rajek. So this will be our second Deep Schooling. And we are thinking of organizing a summer course on forensic linguistics, but I need to consult some experts. So Matt, I think you are on this. So I will need to call you again. Okay, wait for my text. Anticipate that. Yeah.
Anything for you, Pri.
Thank you very much. That's the first one. And the second one, they said, I thank all the participants in this webinar, all of the participants either from host university, University Diponegoro. This webinar is also attended by senior lecturers and professors from different universities in Indonesia. I see Professor Cucu Sutarsa from Universitas Lampung, Professor Silvana Sinar from Universitas Sumatera Utara, Dr. Sailal Arini from UGM, and even from participants across the world. Matt, you believe that Tanjun is attending this meeting? Yeah, Tanjun is attending this meeting. Tanjun,
completely international by this point, huh?
This is very international. I'm not quite happy to see the numbers of participants in this webinar. So it's fluctuative. It's coming out and in, but at the end we have like more than 100 participants. Even in the middle, we have like 180 participants. So thanks to
nice.
Thanks to Dr. Matthew Gillings. Please give a round of applause to Dr. Matthew Gillings.
Also joined.
Yeah, and yeah, these webinars would be closed by the head of Department of Linguistics from our university, but he said he was not feeling well. So yeah, on behalf of the head of the Department of Linguistics, I close this webinar. Thank you very much, Dr. Matthew Gillings, and all of the participants. We are hoping to see you in different opportunities. Please stay tuned on our website for the YouTube recording if you want to see. But before we leave this meeting, we will take more pictures. Yeah. Are you enjoying this meeting?
Yeah. I hope people are still smiling after that, right?
Please turn on
2 hours.
Please turn on your camera and answer my question. Did you or are you enjoying this meeting?
Yes, we are enjoying.
Because this is recorded, so I'm going to analyze the facial expressions later with Dr. Matthew Gillings. This can
and then see whether they're lying or not, right?
Yeah, nice. That's right. Okay, let me talk to our technician, Tariq. You ready? Okay, give us your best smile, not the deceptive ones. Okay, that would be all. Thank you very much, everyone. It's very good to have all of you here. And please stay tuned on our website for upcoming events. Okay. Thank you, Matt. Very good to see you here.
Good to see you too. Thank you for having me, Pri. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Dr. Susanto, thank you very much.
Good to see you again, Susanto.
Yeah. We should do something together. Maybe collaborate in a research project, perhaps. Yeah.
Would be nice, huh?
Yeah. Please say hi to ISO Matt.
Will do, of course. She left to go to. I'm working from home today, but she left to go to the office. I think I was being a little too noisy at home.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Okay, I'll put my email address in the chat for you. AMA is just asked for it, so I'll just put it there. Do feel free to send me an email. You need any help, any tips? Do just let me know. Great, wonderful. Please do send me the screenshots, Pri, of
Thank
everybody
you. I will.
being very nice
Okay.
and smiley. That's great.
Okay. Really good to see the numbers. Okay. So usually before the meeting end, the number drop very quickly, but we still retain 100%, more than 100%. So that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. When I was presenting, I saw it go up to 170, and I thought, it's very nice. That's good.
Very nice. Yeah.
What's the summer school you're planning, Pri? Is it similar to the one at Lancaster then? So just a little bit of everything in corpus linguistics? Is that what you're planning?
Yeah. So it's quite similar, but we don't have the fund to make it as large as Lancaster. So we do it 6 days, and then only 2 hours. So one day study collocation, one day concordance, one day word list and frequency list.
Good.
And at the end, at the 5th meeting, we have a lecture session. So from the 1st to the 4th meeting, it is like a lab session, but
a hands-on workshop.
Yeah, a hands-on workshop. At the end, it's like a special lecture, so it's more like a lecture like this. Okay. And in the 6th meeting, there is a session which I call idea panel. So it's very similar to challenge panel. Yeah? But I will invite participants to submit their draft first, and then at the idea panel, they can present, and then the keynote speaker will give them feedback.
I see. That's a nice idea. Yeah, you get feedback from someone.
Yeah. Because the word challenge panels maybe sounds intimidating, so I challenge.
Especially for us.
Idea. These students.
Mentally scarred. Yeah.
Mentally scarred. Yeah. I actually first invited Robbie again, because like many participants seems to like Robbie. But yeah, I think he said he could not do that because he will be away. So he suggested Niall and another speaker choice.
Okay, nice, good.
Yeah. Maybe next deep scoring, Matt, I will invite you to be one of the instructors.
Sounds good to me. Sounds great.
Yeah.
That's a nice idea. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, and if I am able to write the proposal and the proposal for the forensic linguistics summer course go through, we will have to meet intensively to discuss the curriculum. I mean, like for corpus linguistics summer course, I think I became an assistant in the Lancaster summer course, so I know what the structure like, but I don't know about forensic linguistics. Maybe we can combine a little bit of forensic linguistics and corpus linguistics. Or another idea is to make the first summer course, like corpus linguistics summer course, like a requirement. So in order to be able to attend the forensic linguistics summer course, you have to attend the corpus linguistics summer course. So in that way, we can delve more into the forensic linguistics because the students or the participants will already have the basics for that.
Exactly. It depends on the type of forensic linguistics, right? I mean, because there's other parts of forensic linguistics like forensic phonetics. So this would be comparing things like speaker identification and accent identification and this kind of thing. So I think it's probably about half and half. You know, half of us would use corpus methods and do kind of textual analysis, and then the other half of the phoneticians who would be looking at that kind of thing. So you could do a little bit of both, right? It's a great idea.
That's nice. That is a good idea. Okay, Matt. It's already 2 hours. Okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's been great. It's been very nice and not too early as well. The last time I gave the talk with Susanto, I think it was a 3 a.m. start because of the time difference. It was 3 a.m. for me here in Vienna, so it was nice to start at 9 a.m. this time, though.
Yeah, I always consider time difference, particularly for the speaker. So usually, if the speaker is from UK or Europe, I do it after
in the afternoon,
2 or 3. So that is the most convenient time, I think.
Yeah.
But if the speaker is from Asian, like from Malaysia, from Australia, maybe like 2 or 3 hour difference, it's okay. Like to give it like 9 in the morning because it will be like 8 in the morning in their region. So,
exactly.
Yeah, that's my consideration.
Makes life easier. No, appreciate that.
Yeah, for all of us. Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Matt. Yeah,
Okay, good
and
to see you
talk to
again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, yeah. And I will send you email for your account number later to send the remuneration. Okay.
Wonderful. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
have
you.
a good day, Pri. See you later.
Thank you.
Thanks
You
for
too.
coming,
Yeah,
everyone.
Yeah. Bye. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
I'm going to end this meeting. Yeah. I'm going to close this meeting. Thank you.